My name is Sara Smith-Silverman, and my pronouns are she and they. I'm a professor of history at American River College, and today's date is October 23rd, 2023. So let's start off by establishing the basics. What's your full name? What are your pronouns? And what's your date of birth?
My name is Mico. My pronouns are he, they, and my birthday is December 29, 1996.
Okay, so tell me a little about yourself. What are your interests and hobbies? What do you like to do?
Um, well, I'm a Capricorn. I don't know, like, right now, I'm pretty much studying most of the time, so I don't get to do a lot of my interests and hobbies, but I really like to read. I try to read like a nonfiction and fiction book at the same time, and just, like, go in between them whenever I want. I also love really being outdoors, which is why Santa Cruz is like the perfect school. I love like hiking, camping. Not really big on backpacking, but just yeah, being outdoors, being in nature, going to the beach, hang out with friends. I also love going to like festivals and raves and just being part of that culture. Concerts. I don't know. I recently got into cooking, which is fun. So just trying to cook, but yeah, my hobbies are kind of like all over the place depending on what my current hyperfixation is at the moment. So yeah.
Are there any books that you've read recently, or is there a particular book you've read recently that you like?
Uh, I didn't really like it, but my friend recommended it. It's the book that I literally just finished last night. It's called One Last Stop. It's like a very queer Gen Z book that was like a little bit cringy, but it was nice because the representation was nice, and I read through the whole thing, so clearly I didn't hate it. So, but right now I'm starting Poverty in America. I don't know who the author is, but I
Oh,
saw,
yeah, that's a great book. I
yeah,
read that actually, but I also can't remember the author right now.
yeah. So looking forward to reading that one.
And why do you not like backpacking?
I don't want to dig a hole in the ground and use it in front of everyone. I like plumbing, so
That's the main reason.
that's the main reason is I like running water and plumbing.
I personally like to sleep on a comfortable bed.
Ah, yeah, no, I'm a airbed when I camp type of person as well, so I get it.
Where did you grow up, and where do you live now?
I grew up. Well, I'd say like my childhood was spent in the Philippines, so the first 10 years of my life, I grew up in Cainta Rizal, Philippines, which is like a little suburban area right outside of Manila. And then I moved to California when I was 10. I lived in Yuba City, which is like a small town an hour north of here for 2 years until moving to Elk Grove, where my family's been since then. Yeah.
And how did your family end up in Yuba City?
My dad got a job there. Their hospital in Marysville was offering like a pathway to a green card position, whereas like my dad was also considering living in New Jersey, but that was just a work visa. So he decided to move to Yuba City so he can get the green card and then eventually petition us over to the United States.
And what does he do for work?
He's a nurse. He's an RN. He is actually and he actually has his MD, so he was a doctor in the Philippines, and there was a big brain drain in like the early 2000s where a lot of doctors in the Philippines were moving to the United States to become nurses, and he was one of those people.
That must have been a hard experience for him to go from being a doctor to a nurse.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like my dad's really depressed because of it, to be honest. And we were separated for 4 years too. So from like kindergarten to fourth grade, I didn't have my dad, and because he lived here, and then it took 4 years for the green card petitions to go through and us to be able to move here.
And then, how did that? Do you remember how that felt not having your dad around? And then when you lived with him again once you immigrated?
Yeah, I was I was really young, so it kind of just felt normal. But now that I like look back and I have had time to like ponder on it, I gained like a really bad attachment issue, like abandonment issues because of it. And yeah, but it just felt normal. I have two other sisters, and out of the three of us, I was the one closest to my dad. And it's funny because I remember when my dad was leaving to America, I wrote him this letter, and it was kind of just like I remember this line that was like, "I'll be the man of the house now," which is kind of like oh, that's a big like, oh, that's a little trans kid side. But yeah, yeah, it just felt normal. But then when we moved here, 4 years had gone by, and I only saw my dad once in those 4 years, and so it like really just put a big rift in our relationship, and he was kind of like a stranger. But I remember my mom also telling me like I was the one who was like really closest to my dad growing up.
You said you have a couple of siblings.
Yeah, I have an older sister who is 30, a little sister who's 24, and a little brother who's 14.
Okay, so where do you currently attend college?
I'm currently a student at Smith-Silverman College. I'm pursuing a pre-nursing path, hoping to apply to an accelerated nursing program maybe next fall or next winter.
Are you attending school full time?
I thought I was, and then I counted up how many credits I'm actually enrolled in, and I'm only enrolled in 10. So I am actually a part-time student.
And how long have you been in the program for?
I started this past summer. So I took summer classes, and then this is my second semester.
And are you online or in person or some combo?
Hybrid. So I take one class in person, and then the rest are online.
And what college did you say you attend? Or did you say?
Casino College, CRC.
Okay, can you tell me about how you identify with regard to your social identities, broadly speaking? So, race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, disabilities, neurodiversity, religion, class, and so on.
Yeah, this is funny. During job interviews, I like to tell interviewers I'm like the perfect diversity hire because I tend to check off like every tick of the like, are you part of the oppressed group box? And I kind of pretty much am, other than my socioeconomic status. So I'm an immigrant. I'm Asian American, Filipino. I identify as a trans man. I'm queer. I'm also neurodiverse. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 20, and spiritual. I grew up Catholic, but I don't associate with the Catholic religion anymore. I'm more spiritual more than anything. Um, yeah, I think. Are there any more
Hmm.
boxes to check
How
off?
about class? You said except for your class. How would you define your class status?
Um, my family is more upper middle class, but I alone as like an independent, um, lower class. Yeah,
So you said that you're queer with regard to your sexual orientation. What does that mean to you personally to be queer?
I think if we go by definition, it would be pan, but like I feel like queer is just like such a catch-all umbrella term now, and something about like being able to reclaim what was once like a derogatory term is really powerful. Um, but yeah, to me, I just like people for people, and I don't necessarily like use something like as little as gender to classify whether or not I'm attracted to them. Or I kind of just like the person more than anything, and their energy and how they make me feel over like something as binary as gender, which is not binary, but yeah.
When did you start using the word queer to describe your sexual orientation?
It's funny. So the HBO show Euphoria came out a few years ago, and for the longest time, I was strictly attracted to women, or I believed to only be attracted to women. And it wasn't until I was watching Euphoria and the character Jules was talking about how she now had a girlfriend, and that it was like her realizing that she was she thought she was only attracted to men because that's what she perceived femininity to be. That I realized like I was doing the same thing with my masculinity, that I was so like focused on like being attracted to women because that's what I thought masculinity was. And then it wasn't until I started exploring that side of me, and that was when I fully became comfortable with being trans and who I am, that I realized like I was also attracted to men and everyone else in between. Um, but yeah, it took a long time for me to get to where I'm at now because for a long time I thought I was solely into feminine people.
Do you think there's anything to do with the process of transitioning that helped that, like, helped you along in considering the fact that you're queer?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's also because I'm now like people see me as a man now, which has helped me be like, oh, they like me for like me versus when I was presenting as a woman, where I felt like I was like not myself and putting on like a playing a part versus actually like being fully me.
And so you said you identify as a trans man. So what does that personally mean to you?
Um, I think this is the part of my personality, like my identity that I like struggle with the most, especially like growing up Catholic. Um, just like by very basic definition, it's someone who was born female at birth and born into the wrong body and wanting to transition socially and me as well medically into being male presenting. And it's something as like simple and basic as that, but at the same time, it's just so much deeper than that, you know? Like, I don't know, I never grew up with this inkling that I was trans. Like a lot of trans people like knew since they were a kid they were born in the wrong body, but I never felt that. It didn't the feelings didn't start coming up until I actually met my first trans person. And then I don't know, from there I remember like I would be in like my kitchen during college and I'd be like smoking alone at like 3 a.m. and the thought would pop into my head like randomly. I'd just like randomly think like, oh, I think I'm trans. And then I'd like squash it and wake up the next morning and like, no, I'm not, like whatever. And then it would just like keep coming up again and again, like in random, like months would go by and I wouldn't think about it. And then I would think about it again. And then around 2020, the thought just kept being more and more persistent. And I think it had to do with being in the pandemic, living back at home with my parents, and going through like a really, really big heartbreak that I was like fully alone. Then I had to like sit with my own thoughts and like came to the realization that I am trans. And there was a lot of like shame and fear that came with it, especially with my previous position. I worked with um like youth experiencing homelessness, specifically LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness, and I saw like what was kind of the worst case scenario of like trans youth coming out to their parents, getting disowned, getting kicked out, and I think that really put the fear in my head that that was going to happen to me as well. But I was really like really fortunate that that didn't happen. So I don't know. I think with with being trans comes like strength and resilience and kind of just like and sorry, I'm like going on a tangent here, but I remember like working with trans youth before even realizing that I was, and just having this thought of like, wow, you're so strong, you're so brave, and now coming out as, and they hated it, and like I now share the same result, like same feeling of like I hate when people call me brave, I hate when people call me like you have so much courage, and I'm just like I don't because I this isn't my choice, you know, like I I just want to like I don't want to be trans, but I have no choice but to be. You know, like this isn't something that people want to go through. This like going through like a medically transitioning, going through the ostrac I don't know if that's the right word, but being ostracized by society and all the fear that comes with being trans. That's not something that people want, but it's something that we have to go through because it's like that or just being in pain all the time. And I remember like constantly being in pain all the time and not knowing what was causing it. And it wasn't until I was fully out to my family and friends that like something like a big weight was like lifted off my shoulders, and I don't know, I just felt free. So yeah.
And that was around 2020 or so.
Yeah, 2020.
Um, so when you say that you were experiencing pain, can you elaborate? What does that mean?
I just There was just like this inner burden or like inner weight that was always like wearing me down, and never knew what it was. Like I at first, like I went to therapy for a really long time from like 2016 up until earlier this year. And at first it was like, oh, I'm like bi, and then I came out as lesbian, and then I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I thought like, oh, these are little things that would like it made me feel better little by little. There was always this like big weight that was like carrying, like just holding me down, and I don't know, like I can't explain it, but it was just something that was always there that I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Like I was always depressed, I was always anxious. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me until I like fully came out and realized that I'm trans, which comes with its own problems, but at least there's no longer this inner turmoil that was just eating me up inside constantly.
And so once you realized that you were trans and you started going through transition, how did that feel compared to how you felt before?
I feel like a whole new person. Like not really like a new person, but I feel like I'm finally being me. Like it's liberating and it's just freeing, and it's like I don't know. With it also comes just a lot of sadness, and like you kind of like I look at myself now and I think like, oh, what would my high school experience would have been like if I had known then, or if I had started transitioning earlier? What would my college experience be like if I had known then? Like, how different would things be had I known sooner and had I done this sooner? But I like try really hard not to dwell on that and just focus on like the present and being happy that I'm finally here, because there's so many other people who never got here or are not here yet.
I think that's an important point that you're making, that feeling of loss
Yeah,
that you feel, especially in this political moment when trans youth are being so attacked and
yeah,
being denied healthcare services to help them transition, or just being denied their identity as a whole as trans, right?
yeah.
But people don't talk about that. What's the consequence later for people who are explicitly denied the ability to actually be themselves when they're young?
Yeah, yeah, and I think a part of me also feels like a lot of guilt with that because my transition process was so easy. Like I know, like I'm online. I'm very active on the forums and like Facebook groups, and like a lot of people, especially who come from like red states, have to jump through so many hoops just to be able to start medically transitioning, just to be able to go by their preferred name in school, and just like how many people live in constant fear of being like found out or being just you know and for me, like all my friends were accepting, all my family members were accepting, given my parents took some time, but they were always open to the idea of it. And like I had easy access to therapy. I got referred right away to get like testosterone, and like I felt a lot of guilt that I had to go through. Like I had to work through in therapy of like why was it so easy for me when it wasn't, when it's so hard for everyone else. So that's something I really had to process, and kind of just it makes me want to like be a bigger advocate to make sure it's like this for everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's what's important, right? If you feel like you had some privilege in the process
Yeah,
of being yourself, then sort of using that privilege as in, like as you said, like to be an advocate.
yeah,
That makes sense.
but in scary times, I don't know the validity of this, but I saw a TikTok that was like, if 2020, like if there's a, I don't, just if Trump wins, there's gonna be a chance that like trans people will have to like register as like sex offenders. I don't know the validity of this, but like I see it coming true. Like I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be like surprised if that were to happen, and that's like a really scary thought. Or just I don't know, like defunding Planned Parenthood when so many trans people rely on Planned Parenthood to really to like receive their hormones and just and I don't know. It's scary. It's kind of I kind of live my life primarily stealth, which is a privilege that like a lot of trans men have. That a lot of yeah, trans men have a lot more privileges than trans women. I would say, but
Yeah, it is scary. I mean, um, Trump coming back around after being defeated in the last election and being the runner in the Republican Party, and I mean, given your own background, right? He was incredibly anti-trans,
yeah,
uh, anti-woman. He was in terms of like funding of Planned Parenthood, as you said, and then very anti-immigrant as well.
yeah, yeah. it's I don't know. I I get it in a way just because I'm privileged to be more educated and like being able to understand where a lot of the conservatives are coming from, but it's also just very, very frustrating to see. I don't know, like, yeah.
So you said that you use he and they pronouns. Can you explain why it's important for you to use both of these pronouns?
Yeah, well, in the process of my transition, I didn't just jump straight into he, him pronouns, 'cause especially in the earlier stages of me medically transitioning, I like progressed from like she, her to they, them to now he, they. And I feel like the they part was such a big part of like me actually realizing who was on my side. I don't know, like when I told my friends and I told my family, primarily like my siblings were the ones to really just like, hey, I want to use they, them pronouns, which, well, for me, coming from a very queer friend group, it was a very seamless transition. But like externally in like workplaces and stuff, they had the hardest time just using they them pronouns, and so even if I like socially pass now as a man, I like keeping that they kind of just like as a piece of like my I don't know like my trans identity, or just like as a piece of my like solidarity with people who are non-binary, or just like prefer they them pronouns in general, because I don't know, in a way it's like I see you and I also recognize that they is a valid, like they is valid, and I don't know, in a way it's just like a little thing, little piece that holds me back to that like point in my life, I guess, even if most of the time people just use he, him now.
Um, so, as a point of solidarity, is there? I think you explained it well, but is there anything else you want to say about that, like the use of they as a kind of a well, you said it's a sort of a reference point to your past, but also it's about solidarity with the broader queer and trans community. And is there anything you want to say to elaborate on that? Why how it's about solidarity?
um I just think, well, one thing that like I just think of is I was taking this Asian American history class a few years ago, and the the professor, although she was good and thorough, she only used she, him, like she, him, she, he, him, her in her PowerPoints and like presentations. And part of me, like every time I saw that, it would like sting a little bit, and I was like, I there's because they is also like they she could have just replaced everything with they, and it would still would have made sense, you know. So I just think, I don't know, it just it's for me it feels like it's something so simple, but somehow it's the it's impossible to so many other people, and I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry. That's just
No, that's good. I mean, that makes total sense. It's difficult for other people, and it shouldn't be difficult.
no. And
Or at least people should try to make it not difficult.
no, yeah, like
Even if language is difficult, like for transitions in language, changes in the way we use language is difficult. So how would you, if you would, distinguish between trans masculinity and cis masculinity?
uh, I think trans masculinity, especially being socialized as like feminine presenting for so long, gave me a very unique perspective of what it's like to live life as a woman, which allows me to have a very clear understanding of like what how to respect women's boundaries and how to treat women and how like the struggles that women go through that and I like using this privilege especially now that I fully pass as a man to really just be pro woman and be I don't know, like be an advocate for women's rights in spaces where I'm not seen as a trans man. I'm just seen as like a short cis man, that like I like speaking. Like I remember there was a conversation I was having with a in my CNA classes. There was a pre-transition trans man in my class who everyone just kept misgendering him, and it was like heartbreaking to see. And I was talking about how I genuinely believe women to be the superior gender, and I was saying that just like very openly and with like just the on like fullest honesty, like in my deepest of hearts, that's what I believe. And he was just like, it's so refreshing to hear a cis man say that. And I didn't like I at that time I really wanted to just like come out, but I like couldn't do it in me. But I also felt like there was a lot of power that came with like that statement where I I would rather he believe that a cis man would say this than like a fellow trans man who understands, I don't know. Maybe that's just like me being cowardly in a way, but um yeah, it's weird. It's really a unique experience having seen both like lived both sides and like truly understanding what it means when people say like men respect men in a different level than they respect women and men just have a level of like authority and respect that women don't get. And I truly believe it because I walk into a room and I can like say something and it's taken a lot more seriously than if I had said it before I started transitioning. Or like I can make cis men friends right away and they treat me with a level of respect that I would not have gotten um if I before I transitioned. So I think that's the difference between like trans masculinity and cis masculinity is you have a deeper understanding of what like the struggles women have and yeah, just what we have to do, I guess.
So, is there anything else you want to say about how you would distinguish trans masculinity from cis masculinity before moving on?
I guess well with trans masculinity once you get to this point of not trying to prove yourself to be masculine, you also just have the freedom to be as feminine as you want and not and knowing that that takes away none of your masculinity. And that's something that I feel like a lot of cis men need to like really understand that I know a lot of men who are just very hyper fixated on being masculine when I'm like, hey, you would really benefit from a skincare routine, but they don't because that's something they see as feminine. And I don't know, I think yeah, just I don't know, you have a lot of freedom. I feel once you fully let go of that, and that's something that I probably would not have gone as a cis man versus a trans man.
I guess one follow-up question, and then I'll move on. I mean, I can probably think of a lot more questions,
Oh
but
yeah.
what do you think, like, have you been in situations with cis men and they have said things to you that are like sexist or biased, and you know, what has that experience been like, as somebody who is like passes?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the situation I'm in. There are like two situations that come to mind where I know I could have handled it a lot better, but because I in certain spaces I tend to be more timid, I kind of just didn't say anything. One was I remember getting my haircut in a barber shop, and my barber was talking to me about how women would, because I was talking about how I dated this girl who had kids, and he was basically just saying women with children are damaged goods, and I kind of like really hated that statement. And instead of being in defense of those women, I kind of just didn't want my haircut to get messed up, so I just let him say what he needed to say. Another, and it's funny, I this is like an anecdote I tell all my friends about what my community college experience has been like. My very first day of lab in anatomy, we had to do something that had to do with our radial pulse. And I was in a lab group with these two like jockey baseball guys who are very just like macho, hyper masculine, very like like walk in with like a gallon of water and a protein shake in one hand type of men. And he was like, my lab partner was having a really hard time finding the radial pulse, and having being a CNA and having gone to CNA school, like I told him, hey, if you trace the like your thumb, like the person's thumb, you'll have an easier time finding the pulse. So he looks at the other baseball guy straight in the eye and he goes, "No homo, bro," and then does it, and that was when I knew like, yeah, this isn't gonna be a safe space for me. So I just like had to like play up being cis and not really, and so there are like those little situations where I'm like I feel like such a hypocrite for that because I was just talking about like the have the privilege of passing as a man and having to stick up for women, and then in those situations where I'm just like, hey, like I should have spoken up, but at the same time, it's like I I didn't. I don't know. It's weird. Um, what was the question again?
Oh, what was it? Oh, it's not on my list. It's just something I thought of. So
Yeah,
it was just about sort of being among cis men and how they act. And have you experienced anything that's
yeah.
problematic? And then I guess at the same time, is there anything? Have you experienced anything that's been actually refreshing, like
Refreshing, no.
unexpected, positive?
Refreshing, no. Unfortunately,
Oh, I'm sorry about.
no.
I thought you were going to
Unsurprisingly,
say something more.
no. If we're talking about like cis straight men, never. Cis gay men, for sure, all the time. But like cis straight men, I've never had like a profound moment of like, wow, that was actually like very progressive of you. No, never, not once.
Oh, that makes me sad.
Yeah, same.
Um,
But there are a lot of problematic cis gay men as well who don't see trans men as men, so that's also a whole nother door to open.
okay, so a big question again. I mean, I guess you talked about your coming out experience some, but would you mind going to more depth about what your coming out experience was like, and how you figured out your identities, and then how people around you responded, and friends and family? Very big.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I recently went to Cabo with my friends where I had come out to one of them who I hadn't seen in a long time as just like queer, also like attracted to men. And she made a joke of like, "You've come out to me so many times now that like how many like what other things can you come out for?" And it was just like a really funny moment. But yeah, I feel like I don't know. I've come out so many times, and each time gets easier, but at the same time, it doesn't get easier because it's another piece of you. It's like a very like vulnerable moment coming out. You know, you're like I feel like you're putting so much on the line when you come out, and like yeah. So my first time coming out was like my and it sucks because this isn't the most positive experience, but I remember my junior year of high school, I was texting someone who was I was super close to at the time, And I told her like, hey, like I think I'm bi, and her response was like, are you sure? And after that, like I know that was just coming from a place of like horror and like wanting to make sure that I'm sure, but after that I was just like, yeah, that was not the best coming out experience. But over time I like started coming out as bi to my friends, and I was like fully out to like my closest friends in high school. Apparently finding out years after that there was already a rumor that I was gay going around in high school, so I wasn't hiding it as well as I thought. Um and to my I like slowly came out. I first came out to my little sister, and then I remember, and I didn't come out to my parents until like as gay, like pre-trans. I didn't come out as gay for like a really long time. Although like the closet was made of glass for me. Like I was very masculine presenting. I had a boyfriend once actually, but I feel bad now. But um, yeah, never really brought guys home like my sisters do. I acted very different than my sisters did. So my mom just kept asking me if I was gay, and I kept saying no until I don't know. I remember one time I was like really, really depressed, and I like told my parents like I need to go to therapy, and then so after that I just like added on. By the way, I'm gay. And I remember my mom was like sweeping when I told her this, and she looked up and she was like, I know, and just like kept sweeping. So that was my first time coming out as gay. Um, in college,
How old were you at the time?
probably around like 20. Yeah, so it was deep into college. I had been dating women. I've actually like brought home women I was dating, but we were just friends. But my mom knew the whole time, and my dad didn't really care. Um, uh, I remember this like one specific moment when I this is when I like came out to my older sister, but I feel like this is such like a big part of like my story now was I I recognize I like tweeted something really really petty trying to be funny, which was about something that happened in prom with this girl I went to high school with, and in retaliation she screenshotted a photo of me, and her tweet was like, are you a boy or a girl? And I started it. I like, acknowledge that, and I like have very like that was very wrong of me to do, and I regret it. But I remember seeing that tweet. She took it down like moments after, but I remember seeing that tweet, and I was just so like hurt by it. I was so, and now that I look back, I'm like, yeah, that's because I was trans and I like was suppressing it for so long, and that's why that hurts so much. But I remember like I was visiting my sister in San Francisco at the time when I like saw the tweet, and I was just like so distraught by it, which led to me coming out to my older sister, and she was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I'm bi," not realizing that it was actually my transness that was hurting and not like my queerness. But yeah, so I still think about that tweet, and I'm just like, damn, like that was probably like the catalyst of like me fully realizing that I'm trans was that like one mean tweet that asked if I was a boy or a girl and why that hurt me so much. As for trans, I came out in 2020. Okay, wait. Looking back at this, I came out as gay probably like 2018 then, and queer as trans during the pandemic in 2020. I had like gone through a really 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 hard breakup, and we were in the midst of the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, so I was like alone in my room a lot. And I had like really gone into spirituality for some reason and just meditating, and it's something that I sat with for a really, really long time, and I started like realizing it and coming out to myself. And I remember like looking at myself in the mirror and there was this Snapchat filter. I remember there was this Snapchat filter that would give you like a fake AI beard, and I was just so obsessed with that filter, and I could not like figure out why it felt so affirming to see myself with a beard. And like there were these little things, and then eventually I like came out to like one of my best friends, and similar to my first time coming out as bi, she asked me if I was sure. And that was coming from a place of love, and I knew that she's just like, I'm not like questioning you, I just want to make sure you're like sure about it. And I was like, yeah, dude, I have like dreams, I have a dick all the time, that was, I think that's what it means. And she's like, well, I have those dreams too, but I'm not trans. So it was like just like a back and forth, but eventually I was like, yeah, I'm sure, dude. And she was like, okay, like, do you have a different name? Do you like, she was fully on board and just wanted to see how she could support me. But right now I was just like, I'm just trying to figure this thing out, but I'll let you know when I know. And then I slowly, like, throughout the pandemic, started coming out. I came out to, like, all my closest friends first. And then I came out to my sisters and my cousin I'm closest to. And then I was also like very deeply, deeply depressed during this time. I was like, and my parents could see it. I was like really sad. I was always just laying down in the dark in my room because I had like blackout windows. And then I remember my mom just coming in to like, and she just like laid down with me and she was just like, "What's going on? Like, what's wrong?" And I was like, "I have to tell you something, but I don't want you and Dad to like be upset." And I remember that at that point I had fully come out to my friends and I fully accepted that I was trans. And the thing that I was really struggling with the most was how it would affect my family and my parents because I don't know, in like Filipino culture, kind of just like your image is everything and how you like present yourself like as a family and kind of just you don't tell your family's problems to other people, it just stays within the family. And I didn't like coming from a very, very, very Catholic household. Like we have a huge portrait of Jesus right above my front door, which I hate, but like my parents love it. But we're like my parents are like devout Catholic, and I knew that like they had already accepted me as gay, and that was already a big thing. But like being trans is a to me like a whole nother level than being queer, and so I had no clue how they were going to accept it. I had no clue how the community was going to accept it and how like me transitioning would affect my parents. And that was like the thing I was most scared of. And I like told my mom that like I don't think I'm a girl. I want to like just like I just broke it down very like basically I don't think I'm a girl. I want to like transition into being a boy. And she was like okay, like and we're and I can tell she was like trying to process it. It took a really long time for my parents to like fully accept it. And at this time too, I had quit my job like because just COVID and the stress and I was going through like so much internally. And the thing that like my dad came to me was like, "Well, you're going to need insurance if you want to start transitioning." And I was like, "Why are you so focused on like the money and the like job part of it? Why can't you guys just like support me for me?" And I now look back and that was like my dad being supportive, was him being concerned about the logistics of things. So yeah, that's my coming out story. Um yeah, my it took a really long time for my parents to like fully be on board. They were always initially supportive, but to fully accept me as their son took like year. I even like once I started medically transitioning, I like got the opportunity to move out of my house and I moved out of my house because I didn't want to transition around my family. I wanted to like start my transition journey in another city away from my family and they would see me a few months at a time with a deeper voice and with more facial hair and my body slowly changing, but I didn't want them to be present for the initial stages of it.
Why was that?
I don't know, it was just I don't know. I just felt like it may have been too much for my mom and dad, and also may have been too much for me. It was also just I I didn't a part of me just didn't want to go through my second puberty at the place where I went through my first puberty. I wanted to be I just I just wanted to be away, yeah. Um so my friend asked if I wanted to move to San Jose and I jumped at the opportunity and I moved to San Jose. But yeah, I knew deep down I didn't want to transition where around my parents, like, because I think it would have been a lot for all of us.
So ideally, um, how do you think people should react when we come out? It's a question I haven't asked before, but I
Yeah.
think I just thought of it. I think it's an interesting question because I think a lot of people don't know how to react.
Yeah. For me, I want people to ask questions because I know people have questions, and rather than just like keeping it to themselves, I'd rather talk about it and talk about my experience. Like that's one of my like favorite. Like I remember I have one of my guy best friend, one of the few truly great cis men I know. His name's Brandon. And when I was like FaceTiming him to come out, he was asking like a bunch of questions of like, so what's next? Are you gonna medically transition? And I love that. Like because I feel like so many people are like, oh, I'm so happy for you, and then that's it. But I'm like, no, I want you to like want to know more. I want to be able to share this part with you rather than just like leaving it like at face value and then that's it. It's not just like a happy birthday. It's like a hey, like changes are going to be happening to me. Changes are going to be happening to our dynamic and our friendship, and we should. I want to talk about it. I want to be open with you about it, and I feel like I said, coming out is such a vulnerable thing that I want to. And I also don't want to just like when I come out start telling people everything I want because then I feel like I'm like sharing things they don't really want to know about. I don't know. I feel like wanting to know more shows that you care. So I want that affirmation of like, let's talk about this.
So to start, at least affirmation, because I think there's some sense of a lot of times when we come out, family and friends treat it as very casually
Yeah.
rather than thinking about how difficult that was and how it's important to affirm us as we come out.
Yeah.
Because this sort of comment of like what you said about your mom was like, oh, I know, you know.
Yeah.
And there's something kind of funny about that, but it's also like, oh, well, now let's, so like, you know, continue.
Well,
What's
yeah.
your response?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have loved for her to ask, like, oh, when did you know? Kind of just like be able to share this side of you. Like, and this is also something I've never talked to my parents about. They've never asked me questions about my transition. They've never asked me questions about my transness. So I feel like there's this like huge side of me that they don't know about that I honestly think they don't care to know about. And I think that's the big part of it is like it showed I don't know, for me, wanting to know more shows that you care. So yeah.
Seems like that's a big reason why a lot of queer folks end up finding queer friends.
Yeah.
Because among this cis straight world, there's often this reaction where they sort of pretend like that part of you doesn't exist,
Yeah.
and then want to bond up on this in this other way. But that part of you is not a small part of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think in a way it just makes them uncomfortable too because it's something that they don't understand so they can't relate to it. So they'd rather just act like it's not there than put themselves in an uncomfortable situation. I think that's just how I see it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
also I think that's part of this whole project is that I'm doing is people often think it's enough just to say that they're not transphobic or they don't hate you because you're trans or they don't hate you because you're queer or gay or whatever. But that's not enough, right?
Yeah.
There's understanding is necessary
Yeah, I agree.
to be fully welcoming and inclusive and affirming.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Um, so you kind of said this, but where did you find the most support and affirmation as you came out?
I think my friends that I met in high school and college. Uh, Sir, you brought out like queer people tend to find other queer people, and that's like exactly the case that happened with both my high school friend groups. Where so, in high school, ironically, I hung out with the theater kids, so this should have been like a well, duh. Everyone ended up coming out post high school, and yeah, so like gradually my friends and I all became like just more comfortable with ourselves and we all eventually like came out as queer and So we all naturally gravitated towards each other in high school. And the same exact thing happened in college, where I remember my first year of college, there were only three of us who were out in my entire. I was part of the Filipino organization in college, and there were only like three of us who were like openly out in that entire org, and we all gravitated towards each other. But our like proximal friend group, everyone around us, like we still had friends. And over the last few years, during undergrad and post undergrad, everyone started coming out gradually as well. So I feel like we all naturally gravitated towards each other as well, even if we didn't know that they were queer at the time. We just all clung to each other, and eventually, and maybe being close to people who are queer helped you explore your own identity and your help you come out to yourself and to others. And that actually like happened twice now. That when I had come out as trans, I had two of my friends from undergrad come up to me and was like, "Hey, like you coming out helped me realize that I'm actually non-binary, and I would start wanting to go by they them pronouns." And then I talked about their process, like their journey with them, and um, so yeah, I think that's cool. And so having very safe, queer friendly spaces, they were really the ones that helped get me through. And also understanding that like at the chance that I would get rejected by my family, I had someone somewhere to like fall back to. So I was very fortunate in that regard.
So, do you think your family had any expectations around femininity and masculinity that you found it that was you had to navigate around in some way as you were figuring out your identities?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, we grew up very, very Catholic. My parents now less than before, but at least growing up, they've very much stuck to the roles associated with their gender. Where my mom, despite working a full time job, she did all the cooking, all the cleaning. My dad kind of just brought home more money, so he just got to do less. We are all also much closer to my mom than my dad, so although they did not parent us very much, at the end of the day, like if I have a hard day or if I need to go through something, I would go to my mom over my dad about it. So she did more of the parenting. And so yeah, they never like cuz older sister and little sister, and so up like my dad didn't really grow up like I grew up with no brothers, so we never I don't know. I also grew up with like a lot of male cousins, and there was like the expectation of like the girls needed to be more behaved, while the boys got to roughhouse a lot more, and so we were very like well behaved kids, and I don't know, well mannered kids, and yeah. So, but I don't know. There's also like my parents never limited us because of our gender that a lot of Filipino families do. Like a lot of Filipino families don't let their daughters leave for college, but we all left for college, and my parents never stopped us to do that. They never really tried to influence what we studied. So, in a way, my parents are very liberal in respect to other Filipino parents, but there is still the gender norms within that family that was like expected of us that I feel reflect us now, which me and my sisters made it a very strong point not to instill onto my brother. So like at a very young age, we let our brother like the color pink and stuff, or we always let him. I remember we got in this huge fight with with my mom specifically, because me and my sisters all got like these matching pink sweaters, and my little brother wanted one as well. And we were like, "Yeah, we'll get you one." And my mom was like, "No," like a very hard like, "No, boys can't wear pink," blah blah blah, and like. And I think my mom also has this fear that my brother might turn gay, and I'm like, and she's like, "It's okay if you are, but I don't want him to." And I'm like, "Well, why not? Because that's like your only son, you know?" So yeah, so we were very, very big on instilling my brother just like you can be whoever you want to be, you can love whoever you want to love, and I think he's like a really amazing kid now, and it's something I'm really proud of. He's also very like socially aware and very knowledgeable of like privilege. Yeah, so
That's really nice that you're
yeah,
able to do that with your brother.
yeah.
Um, okay, so where do you find queer joy?
This is Pride. I love going to Pride. um, I don't know. There's there's a lot of not a lot of, but also a lot of safe spaces for queer people. I know I'm very active in a bunch of different like forums on Reddit and Facebook where I know I'm not there's a lot of other queer and trans people on those sites, so I feel less alone. Um, Also just going, I don't know. I love going to gay bars and clubs. I thought although a lot of them have become overrun by straight women, unfortunately, which is very frustrating. But yeah, I also I recently over the pandemic have gotten into like very into the art of drag. You know, like probably not for myself, but I love going to drag shows. Like in person, I love watching RuPaul's Drag Race and just like having that queer representation on in mainstream media. So great. Um, just yeah, I do admit that I need more trans men friends in real life. You know, there's I know there's this event coming up next week for like trans masculine folks in like Sacramento, and I hope I have the courage to go to that. I like really hope I have the courage to go to that down the like eventually. But yeah, um, yeah, just spaces where you can celebrate your queerness and feel safe is where I find queer joy. But Pride, I love Pride. I love going to SF Pride.
Sacramento?
I've never been to Sacramento Pride, but I've only been to San Francisco Pride.
So do you have any favorite gay bars?
In Sac, I love Badlands because I also like to dance and like just have fun. And Faces also always has like a $20 cover, so I'm like I'm not gonna go to Faces, but I like Badlands. And we used to always go to the Merc, but I heard that there's like problems with the Merc now, so we try to avoid going to the Merc just with in regards to problematic behavior from the bartenders and stuff. So
Oh, really? I
yeah,
hadn't heard about that.
that's what my friend told me. That, so, but they have really cheap and strong drinks, which is perfect for a pregame spot.
I do remember going, I think it's before the pandemic at this point. It
Yeah,
did feel like it was kind of taken over by straight people
yeah,
in the evening. I know that's not uncommon, but I just remember thinking, oh, if I want to come here, I'm going to come here at like 6 p.m.
yeah, yeah. In San Jose, there's only one gay bar, which sucks because it for fully got taken over by um straight women mainly, and it's like wow, I don't even feel safe to like try to talk to women here because I know that a lot of them are like straight and avoiding men, which I also understand that that is they perceive to be a safe space, but it's not like their safe space to claim.
Okay, so you talked about being diagnosed with sort of transitioning, if it's
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
to
yeah.
being diagnosed with ADHD when you were 20, I think. So how has
Yes.
that impacted you generally and your education in particular?
That was hard. It's like because I was a really bad student, but I also had like the social pressure from my parents and also being Asian to like get straight A's. So I knew what I needed to do to get straight A's while doing the absolute bare minimum. That was like my entire high school career was I had a whole system down of like which is smart. Like in retrospect, like it was a very smart system where I would always have like a try to have like a free first period, but like every class I had a friend who was in the next period who would give me their homework. So like for first period, I would have someone give me their second period's homework. For second period, I would have someone give me their third period, and for third period, I would like every single class for like all throughout high school. I had this system, I was also like very sociable. I was a lot more extroverted back then. So yeah, and I took all like almost all the AP classes, and a lot of the AP teachers had this thing where if you pass the AP test, you'll get straight A's. So I wouldn't care. Like I would get like B's. I couldn't get C's because my parents would check my report card, but I would get B's and buckle down like 2 weeks before the AP test and just study really really hard, pass the AP test and get straight A's. So for my sophomore and junior year, that's what I did, and then yeah, and then all that changed in college. Well, in college I was an even worse student, and I had the same system except I wasn't striving for A's anymore. I was just striving to pass. So I would calculate like what I needed to do in order to pass my classes while never going to classes. So like professors would have like 10% of your grade as your attendance. So I'm like, okay, what do I need to score on my tests and quizzes in order for my 10% to not count, but I would still get like B's and C's. So I calculated that, and I would always, and this was like very much the undiagnosed ADHD where I like had fully convinced myself if I go to class, I don't pay attention. I'm just on my laptop the whole time. So I would rather just take the content they post online and teach myself and go to the tests and pass. So for like most of my classes, I remember there was like one class I ended up getting a C in that I was fairly proud of now. I showed up 3 times, and that was for the first day, the midterm, and the final. Everything else like self-taught myself. And so in retrospect now, that was like very much just like my undiagnosed ADHD, and honestly like just relying on like my smartness, which I believe I am, to be honest. Not as much now as I was back then, because but yeah, I was not a good student. I and so But I remember like during finals, it was like my second year. I think it was my second year. I remember going to the library with my friends, and we were there literally for like 12 hours, and I was like actively trying to work, but I left 12 hours later, and I was like, I did nothing, and I learned nothing, and I don't know why, and there's something wrong here. And I had been going to therapy already for my anxiety, so I like told my therapist like, hey, I think I have ADHD. Can you like test me for it? And then so he did the initial diagnosis, and then he sent me to the school to get like properly tested, and then which like had like the actual tests, and it also had like a take home thing like where a family member had to fill it out, and I had my older sister fill it out because my mom would just be ignorant to it, and she was like, no, you were a good student and stuff, but like my older sister was the one who actually like paid attention and saw like, no, you were super messy and stuff like that. Um so I went through the testing, ended up having ADHD. I got on medication, which helped. But at the same time, like a lot of people, I think feel that like once you're on meds, it's just like this magic cure that all your problems are solved. But that's not really the case. Where although the medication helped, there's still like years and years of unlearning to do, and like breaking down like the systems that have helped me survive up to this point and doing it the right way. So my third year, although the meds help, it was still a lot of the same thing. Plus, I was like very like neck deep in addiction at that point. So yeah. So now that I'm back in school, I'm learning. Well, this also like seriously affected how I did it during like my in my professional life. So I've grown a lot over the last few years. I've come up with systems that work for me, and now that I'm back in school, I'm actually like taking it a lot more seriously this time. Like I find myself like actually putting in a lot of effort and going to class every day, and um but yeah, no, it's also hard being going being an adult and getting diagnosed, because similar to like being trans and like all that, like what if of like had I known sooner, where would I be? There's also that same feeling with ADHD of like, had I known when I was a kid, or had I known when I was in high school and had started med sooner, like how different would my life be, you know?
Why do you think it is that you didn't get a diagnosis earlier?
Partly because Asian parents don't really believe in. I don't think my parents fully believe in ADHD, although my dad is a fully pledged doctor slash nurse. They know I have ADHD. They don't. It's one of those things they don't acknowledge or talk about. Although I'm like fairly certain my mom has ADHD. Um, but also just because I was doing well in school and on paper I was doing really well in school. I was making good grades, and so it didn't seem like I had ADHD, even if internally I was like really struggling. Um, it's funny. I kept my senior year backpack like as is how it was, and if you open it, it's just a bunch of different like loose papers and trash everywhere. It was like an absolute fucking mess. And I'm just like, how did no one catch my ADHD looking at this backpack, And so, yeah, I think I just am one of the thousands of kids who slipped through the cracks because on paper it seemed like nothing was wrong.
So it's okay if you don't want to talk about this, obviously, but you mentioned that you were neck deep in addiction.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say that?
Um, I started smoking weed probably when I was 15. Yes, my freshman year of high school. And then at first it was like a very social thing. It's like a cute, fun thing to do with my friends. And then by senior year, by junior year, I was smoking every weekend. And by senior year, there would be like weekdays I would be smoking with my friends. So it was just like a very normal thing that's entrenched into my social life, which carried over to undergrad. But with undergrad came like the freedom of like, there's no longer the fear of coming home smelling like weed and my parents finding out, or the fear of like, oh no, my parents are gonna smell it in my room. So and I just kept smoking, and it was so big in like the Santa Cruz culture that like it was so normalized. I remember my first year of college, there would be some classes where I would like walk into class with nothing but like a bong in my backpack, and I would like come in from class late, fresh off a sesh, smelling, walk straight to my seat, not take notes or anything. I would just like at least I'm in class, And and it gradually just kept getting worse and worse, where it's like it went from like being a social thing to like an everyday thing to like I to the point where I would wake up. The first thing I would do like to start my day is I would take a hit and start smoking, and then get ready, start smoking, go to class, have a little like vape pen with me, and I would just be hitting it as I'm walking through the woods in Santa Cruz. I'd be hitting it in the McHenry Library. I would be like hitting my vape pen and then go home, start smoking, like smoke with my housemates when they would all go to bed, keep smoking. So I was just like smoking a lot. And so my third year, like going into my fourth year, when I was like deciding to whether or not to graduate early, I was like, I need to take myself out of this environment and get sober. And for a while I did get sober. And then just something happened with my family, and which triggered me to start smoking again. And ever since, it's just been a very turbulent relationship in my life where I know 100% I'm better sober. I would rather be sober, but I I like smoking. I like weed. I like the feeling of being high, and there's a part of me wants to believe that I am able to have like a good relationship with weed, but a part of me also knows that I'll never have that, and if I start smoking, then I will eventually fall off the wagon and start my daily use again.
How do you think that smoking so much affected your education while you're at UC Santa Cruz? And how does it maybe it affects you now, if you want to talk about that?
I would have much better grades. I remember smoking before midterms and finals and not going to class so I can like ditch and smoke with my friends. I think it's fully impacted like my cognitive development now, where like the things that they warned you in like ninth grade health class is actually true. Like my memory sucks now. And my friends who have also like were smoking with me have the same sentiment of like, hey, my memory is like of a goldfish now, and I'm like, I think it's because we smoked so much. And yeah, so it's hard. Like, um, now it's the same now where I know I'm better sober, but sometimes I don't know. It's just really hard to fight the urge to smoke. Um, you know,
Do you think that your professors, I guess around your ADHD, do you think there's anything that professors could do or could have done or could do right now to kind of help you succeed in class? Any kind of accommodations that you can think of? Any ways that professors should kind of relate to students who may have ADHD to help them do well in their classes?
DSPS accommodations are nice. I got them my last year in college, and I have them now where I have extra testing time, and the big thing for me is like the quiet space to test because if I'm like around other people, I'm like very focused on like the sound of their pencil, like writing or like someone sneezing or coughing, and um, yeah, I remember I'm right now like in class, in my anatomy class, which is in person, I would like hyperfixate on the sound of like the girl next to me's like Apple Pen hitting her iPad, and her this girl just not have sorry I assumed her job, but this person next to me does not ever keep her ringer off, and it always goes off. So I just like hear it going off nonstop, and it just distracts me so much. And I'm just like, I don't want to be rude and tell them to turn off the ringer, but at the same time, like you're in class, don't be rude. But I don't know.
So maybe the professor could mention
Yeah,
something.
yeah. I think the professor should, but in terms of classes, I guess I don't know because I I don't know. I don't do well with a lot of readings, but and I also understand that a lot of classes you need to read a lot for. I don't know. I don't know what accommodations. I don't know because there's also this big thing I'm seeing a lot more in mainstream media about like just time blindness being one of them, and how there are ways to combat time blindness, and I also like suffer from time blindness, but at the same time it's not like we can't really keep hiding behind the ADHD because of it. We need to like push through it rather than like hide behind it. So there are those things where I'm like it would be nice to like have that accommodation, but at the same time that's also not how the real world, but I feel like at the same time the real world also needs to accommodate for people with ADHD. So I think there's also that thing where like colleges and schools are very, very accommodating, but then once people with ADHD are thrust into the real world, they're not. It's a big shock of like, hey, if you're not meeting your deadlines, you're gonna get in trouble at work or stuff like that. So
It's hard because I feel like it's sort of similar to queer stuff that we don't, as faculty, get much training in understanding queerness, and we don't get much training in understanding what it means to have ADHD. We don't get much training in what it means to have various disabilities and be
yeah,
neurodiverse, and so it feels to me like we're still really much at the beginner stage of serving our disabled and neurodiverse students.
yeah,
In that sense, like it's all about DSPS, sort of
yeah,
providing some accommodations, but we haven't figured out. I don't think I could speak for myself personally,
yeah,
but I do think this is fairly common. But we haven't figured out how to think about our pedagogy, our classroom practices, and
yeah,
how we're delivering content and how we're engaging our students with ADHD in mind.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah,
so there definitely could be some more training.
yeah. And honestly, I don't know either because that's kind of just like the norm that we're used to is like I never. I remember in Santa Cruz, it was all the statement was always said in like in the spaces I was in, well, like, this university isn't made for you. And I never fully understood what that meant until I like got my ADHD diagnosis, and I was like, oh, this university really wasn't made for someone with ADHD. So I feel like the way school works now is not made with someone with ADHD in mind. And but at the same time, like I don't know what would be the best practices for someone with ADHD would be because I've never experienced good practices with ADHD. So it's like a double-edged sword in a way.
So I'm not sure how to ask this next question. It's about thinking, I want to think through that kind of if there's an intersection between your queerness and having ADHD. Do you think there's a relationship between the two? Do you see an intersection there?
Yes, because in a lot of spaces and just in a lot of my friends, there tends to be an overlap between being neurodivergent and being queer. I don't know why it is the way it is, but there's definitely like, I don't want to make up a statistic, but I would say just based on experience and based on what I've seen both in the real world and online, if you do identify as part of the LGBTQ community, there's also a higher probability of you being neurodivergent. I don't know if it's a cause and effect relationship or if it's just two independent variables that tend to like go happen simultaneously, but whatever, for whatever reason, I don't know. I also maybe think it's the level of self reflection that a lot of people who are not part of those groups don't get to do or have, because if you are like in tune with like, oh hey, maybe like I'm queer, and then you're like, oh hey, like actually I don't know. It's also makes me think of like all of the different things that I've gone through of like, oh like if I had like not gone to therapy for my anxiety, then maybe I wouldn't have gone to therapy for like and figured out my ADHD, and maybe I wouldn't have had the self reflection skills to come out as trans. And I think it all also like maybe interlocks in that way, but I'm not sure. It just they tend to go hand in hand from experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Anything else you want to say about that, about the intersection between having ADHD or being neurodivergent and being queer in your own personal experiences?
Not really. Makes for a fun time, you know.
Okay. Um, what about the intersection of being Asian American, specifically Filipino, and being queer? How do you see those two intersecting?
It's interesting because in pre-colonial times in the Philippines, there was a third gender, which is like known as a baklat, who was like highly regarded within communities. And then like I don't know, just like knowing the history of like then like the Spanish came in and very like for 200, 300 years very strongly enforced what they perceived to be like the binary of the two genders, and then which went to the erasure and then the ostracization of people who identify as baklat. And I grew up like when the way I grew up, it was a very much a derogatory term, but now similar to like what's going on in the United States with the word queer, there's been a reclamation of it in Filipino history. I don't know. I think it's also interesting having grown up in the Philippines versus just having a fully fledged like Filipino American experience, because I grew up within that culture and I was very, although I was young, I still had like an awareness, social like awareness to it, and it's very backwards from like here in the Philippines and here in America, where in the United States, like queerness, specifically like transness, is like protected legally, but socially is not as accepted. Whereas in the Philippines, having being like a very predominantly Catholic country, transness and queerness is not protected like in a legal standard, but it's very like socially accepted in the Philippines. Where whereas it's like socially accepted, but it's also more like they're seen as like characters and like sources of entertainment rather than full pledged people. But at least there's a level of acceptance that happens in the Philippines that doesn't isn't the same in the United States. And I can't tell you what's better or what's worse. Um, but yeah, just growing up very Catholic, there's a lot of like Catholic shame that comes with it that you have to like undo and teach yourself and really like do a lot of self reflection of why a lot of like my self loathing where that came from. And um yeah, it's It's weird. It's a really interesting dynamic. I don't know.
What about on the issue of representation? So you mentioned RuPaul's Drag Race, for instance. I
Yeah.
mean, do you see queer Filipino, queer Asian American representation on TV in Hollywood?
No, not at all. Um, and I think that's what makes it hard is that there's, like oftentimes if I'm looking for like trans representation, especially like trans man representation, like trans representation tends to be trans women, like, and there's you never really see trans men in media, you know. Um, Same with queer. It's already very hard to find like Asian American representation in media, let alone like queer Asian representation in media. So I tend to cling on to like the what we can get, but I I can't think of a single person who like looks like me or has a similar experience to me in Hollywood today.
And how important do you think that representation is for you personally, and what would it have meant to you, uh, like growing up?
Oh, I think it would have been everything. I think going back to like the point I made earlier about like me coming to terms with like my queerness and the Euphoria, the TV show Euphoria, like had there been more exposure, maybe I would have known sooner, or had there been more trans representation, had there been more queer to representation, maybe I would have like accepted myself a lot sooner, or just at least draw awareness. And it also brings awareness to like the rest of the like society, like I don't know. I feel like, especially Asian Americans, we tend to fall into tropes. And if there are ever representations that don't fall into the trope, that's more power to like the to our communities where we don't fall into like a stereotype. I think I love The Good Place. Like I don't know if you've seen it, but Manny from
I've seen that only a couple of episodes. Yeah.
is his name Manny? Manny Jacinto. He plays Jason, and he's like a dumb Filipino DJ who that very much exists in the community, but you never see that. So that was so big for me because like yeah, like that's another side of us that we get to see and express in mainstream media, which breaks away from the mold of like how we're supposed to be.
What about, you said you took an Asian American history class while at UC Santa Cruz. Was there queer representation at all in that class?
No, I don't think so. It focused a lot on the Vietnamese community, ironically enough, and I think it was because our professor is Vietnamese. But um, no, I didn't really. No, I can't think of queer representation in that class.
So we left off talking about the intersection of being Filipino and queer. Is there anything else off the top of your head that you can think of to say about that? No, that's a very general question.
I don't know. No, I'm not sure.
So you said, like, have you taken any classes that have been inclusive? So I know we're talking now about, because you're what do you call it, a nursing student at CRC and at UC Santa Cruz. What did you study?
Econ.
Econ. Okay. So at UC Santa Cruz, did you take classes that were inclusive of the queer and trans experience?
Not really, actually. No. I didn't really explore, which is something I regret, but I didn't really explore outside my major, which is how I was able to graduate so early, because I kind of just took all the classes I needed to get out. I never really took a lot of fun classes.
And you said that you graduated in 3 years instead of 4.
Yes,
And why was that?
just student loans were a lot, and also just needing to get out of that environment for my own health reasons, and partially housing.
And then you took the Asian American history class, but Were other classes inclusive of the Asian American experience while at UC Santa Cruz?
There's a student-led class within my organization, the Filipino organization, that specifically taught Filipino history, but we didn't have like an assigned professor for it. Like students were the ones who were elected to teach it, and then they would teach the class. So that was something, but for the most part, I don't think so.
Did you help to teach that class?
No, I took it, but no, I never taught it.
And do you remember if the queer experience was covered in that class at all?
I don't think so. The year that I took it, I had friends who taught the class, so maybe they touched upon it, but at least the time that I was in the class, we didn't really. It was more focused on like the Filipino American experience and the United Farm Workers movement and stuff like that.
And now, since you've been at CRC, have you been able to take classes that talk about Asian American experiences?
Not really. No. I took I took a sociology class with Dr. Lum and SEC, which was more focused on like American sociology. So that we did touch upon Asian American experiences there, but I think it's also largely due to the fact that Dr. Lum is an Asian American professor herself, so she brought that into her class.
And how about queer experiences? Have any of your classes talked about queerness at all?
I don't think in specific to queer experiences, but I have a communications class that I'm in now that I brought my own queer experiences onto, like the discussion posts that we have and stuff, but not really in person.
For the nursing major, do you have to take all these general ed classes?
Some, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, have you found that you have sort of, as a student in classes that really don't talk about queerness, have you found that you have had to teach other students about what it means to be queer and trans?
Mm, not really, because it's not really touched upon, and also just for my own safety and protection, I live my life in stealth in most spaces I don't find to be queer friendly. So I just try to pass and fly under the radar.
So if you could have, thinking back, would you like to have taken classes that include the queer and trans topics, either, focused wholly on those topics or at least in part?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think I would have learned a lot. I think there's a lot of power into knowing your history, and I remember, and this sounds bad, but I had a job where I ran an LGBTQ group for seniors, which was a really fun job, but I knew nothing about history. And my coworker was the one who had to tell me about like the AIDS quilt, or, and I was like, I know nothing about this because I never learned it, and I don't know. I should learn more. I know I've benefited a lot from learning about Filipino history, so I should learn more about queer history because that's also part of my identity, and I fully recognize that like, oh, just like we stand on the shoulders of those who come before us. So, recognizing that history is also a form of respect and also learning about like our own struggles and stuff like that. So, yeah, but when I have the time.
So why do you think it might be important for courses uh, to cover the queer and trans experience?
I think it's an important part of like United States history as a whole. We or just like world history as a whole. Like, being like queer and trans people exist and they existed in the past, they exist now, and they'll exist in the future. And just touching upon this subject in class kind of shows those students that like, hey, we see you, you matter. Also normalizing it so it's not such a taboo topic for those who are not part of those communities. Like, there's more to queer history than just talking about Stonewall, and like, which is just like a one paragraph at the end of like at the end of the chapter. And yeah, I think it's just as important to learn about these like historical figures as it is to learn about like other figures like the presidents and stuff, because they impacted a large group of people as well. And especially with how much, although we're slowly regressing, but we have progressed a lot. So it's important to know what it took to reach this progress, and it also helps other marginalized groups too. You know, 'cause-
Yeah, maybe if queerness was more embedded in the curriculum, if the curriculum were more queer, we would be seeing less of this regression that they're
yeah,
experiencing because people would actually understand it better.
yeah, definitely.
Um, so I actually skipped high school entirely. Did you ever take classes in high school that covered the Asian American or queer experience or the Asian American queer experience?
Not at all. No.
Hmm.
Um, no. I also took just mainly AP classes in high school, so I didn't really have a time to take electives. I did take like an African American history class once, or literature, one or the other, but that's primarily, yeah. We didn't have anything of like critical race theory or anything in my high school.
So I'm sort of struck by the fact that you've said in high school, in college, and now at CRC, I mean, it seems like there's this kind of systemic exclusion of the Asian American experience and the queer experience
Mm-hmm.
from being kind of integrated into the curriculum, generally speaking, right?
Yeah,
Outside of those specific classes like Asian American history or the Filipino history class that you took, or the kind of, if you choose to take a queer studies class, if it's offered, right?
yeah.
Um, why do you think, I mean, so as somebody who's both Asian American and queer, what is that? I guess, what do you think that exclusion feels like? That kind of like just, yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that's the question.
I guess it feels like our history doesn't matter, you know? Like, I don't know, like especially like for those classes that are specifically like Asian American history or queer history, people who seek out those classes are more likely to not part of that group. So we're learning about ourselves, but like everyone else is, which like brings upon like it's now like our responsibility to teach everyone else what we learned versus everyone else just learning it like with us. So it's very like demoralizing, and it makes you feel like an other rather than you're part of like the mainstream, like the larger group in general.
Um, so I know you said that you tend to be stealth now, but what's been your experience being misgendered? Have you had the experience of being
Yeah,
misgendered?
yeah, that's kind of why I live life pretty stealth. Is I've had experiences where before coming out, I was never misgendered. Like even like pretty early on to my transition, but like far along enough to where like my voice dropped. I was showing facial hair. I had this like previous job where I worked with unhoused youth. Um, and my coworkers like they had no problems with he/him pronouns, and then I came out to a few of them where I like felt like comfortable coming out to them, and then out of nowhere I started getting she/heard when they had not been doing it before. And the only thing that had changed was them finding out that I was trans. Like I still looked and acted the same way I did prior to coming out, but all of a sudden I started getting misgendered. So to protect myself, I would rather just not go through that again, or not having to explain myself, or not having to answer any questions. I'd rather just blend in and focus on like the what we're there for rather than it. I don't know. And maybe this is like internalized transphobia as well, but also don't want like being trans to be my only identity. And for a lot of people, when you come out as trans, that becomes the only thing they see. So I'd rather let me as Mico shine than like Mico the trans guy shine, you know?
And so, what does the experience of being misgendered feel like?
It hurts. It's like you're, I don't know, it's just like this quick, like a jolt. I don't know, it stings, especially if you weren't getting misgendered before. Even just like now, if like there's, I don't know, there's a difference with like simple slip ups. Like it still like stings a little bit, but when someone says she, oh no, he, like they quickly like correct themselves, that it still hurts a little bit, but it's fine versus people just blatantly using the wrong pronouns. And some people are just stubborn and stuck in their ways, so they will blatantly misgender you because they don't like perceive you to be you.
Have you been in classes where professors have shared their pronouns and asked students to share their pronouns?
Yes, ish online. In online classes during like the introductory posts, it's oftentimes been normalized to share your pronouns as well. Sometimes students do them, sometimes they don't. I always do. But in my in-person classes, the two that I've taken thus far, the first one, no, we weren't asked to share pronouns at all, and the second one, we were asked to share pronouns, but it was only to the professor, not to each other, which still like opened the door for like students to get misgendered by other students, even if your teacher was properly referring to you as your preferred gender pronouns.
So, why do you think it's important for professors not only to share their own pronouns and understand what your pronouns are, but to ask students in the class to share their pronouns?
I think right away it shows to students that it's a safe space, but also it normalizes the use of like other pronouns to other students. I think it's weird going from like Santa Cruz where that's like right away, like in every space I've entered in Santa Cruz, we introduce ourselves with our pronouns, you know. And going to CRC, it's not as normalized, so it's weird. It's an interesting experience, but yeah, I think it just normalizes it for everyone and takes away the taboo of like someone having to be like, actually, hey, I use they them pronouns, and then it becoming a big deal. Instead of it being a big deal, it just because it's not a big deal, you know, it's not that hard to adjust what pronouns you use to like refer to someone. So it should be just a quick like, hey, these are my pronouns, move on.
So, a lot of the time, even when professors ask students for their pronouns, they're still like they still make mistakes,
Yeah.
sometimes repeated mistakes, right? With misgendering. How do you think professors can do a better job of learning people's pronouns and not making those mistakes?
I think you have to be intentional about it and recognize that it's a very big part of someone's like identity or just like feeling safe in your class means you see them for who they are and whatever pronouns they refer to as. I think I don't know. I see oftentimes like oh just use they, but like what if they don't identify with using they? So that's also like I don't know. I think yeah. I'm sorry I forgot the question.
You know, it's just what can professors do to do a better job
Oh
actually understanding the importance of pronouns and using the correct pronouns. That's the
yeah
question, right?
yeah. I think for me when my friends started like I have a very close friend of mine who uses they them pronouns and I had to put next to their like contact name on like my phone like they them to keep reminding now it just comes naturally but you really do have to like train your brain into like understand like and it's also like just a way of respecting the person as well but yeah like you just really have to be intentional in learning this person's pronouns and like recognize like hey like this is important and it may take some time but at least you're like putting in the conscious effort to use the right pronouns. Because yeah, natural like just our natural instinct is to use she, her, he, him pronouns, but that's not the that's not how it is all the time.
So, have you had the experience of being in a class and feeling like, oh, this is a space where I feel like I really belong, like this feels like a safe space, either because you're queer and trans, or Asian American, or both, right? Like, is
Yeah,
can you think of an example where that has been the case, specifically around your identity?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was an online class, so it's different. Like it was an online we meet in person and break off into Zoom groups type of online class, but it and maybe there's also just a sense of safety being behind a screen versus like in person with other people, but there was one class where I felt that safe to be able to share parts of my experience with my group. Um, but I think professors really have to put in a conscious effort into making sure that people know it's a safe space and like addressing things right away when things like maybe something harmful was said and you address it right away versus letting it slide or letting it linger in the air. Um, but yeah, in person, no, I don't think I've had that experience either.
What was it about that one class, do you think?
It was we were talking about like it was a class where it was a sociology class where we talked a lot about race and inequality in the United States. So I think just the topic and like the readings that we had to do, and our professor really made sure that we did the readings because the questions in the class were catered towards those like the topics we would talk about in group were about the readings. So also I guess also having that like the thing to fall back on, which are the readings, and then we also share our experiences that allow us to like have this that it's just like a natural like organic progression of like having these conversations, I guess, versus just like throwing in like a deep question and having everyone like, oh well, now I have to like share this deep part of me that I'm not really comfortable with. And also just the professor talking about her own experiences as well, and like just putting in a full effort of creating as safe a space as you can in a Zoom environment. Yeah.
So, have you had the experience of, or have you experienced bias, either racial bias or kind of queer phobic bias in the classroom?
I don't think so. Not in at least not in the spaces I've been part of. Maybe like more in like econ classes because the nature of those classes tend to lean more capitalist sometimes, even in Santa Cruz, ironically. But um, never really for like race or gender reasons, but more just anti-capitalist beliefs.
Yeah, economics departments are not known for their
Oh
anti-capitalist
yeah,
belief,
yeah.
even at Santa Cruz.
Even in Santa Cruz, yeah, yeah. My
Wow.
favorite like anecdote to share about I we were doing presenting our like senior theses, and we had one person unironically share how they want to privatize the transplant industry, and I remember just sitting there in disbelief, and it was just like, the professor let you do this as your senior thesis, and that just like highlighted like, oh, this is what EC Santa Cruz econ department's all about.
Um, hmm. So I guess what do you think professors can do if you had your ideal situation? How could what could professors do in the classroom, not just in terms of their curriculum, but also in terms of their practices, to make queer and trans students in general feel welcome and included?
I feel like this is so small, but I love when spaces have like the queer flag on it or like a "you belong here" things. It's like little things like that on the wall, or just on in person with a professor makes you like immediately like, oh, okay, like that's just like a little affirmation of like, okay, it's a safe space. But just it's little things, like it's very easy to say this is a safe space for everyone, but it's also like the way that you show it and the way you like carry yourself as a professor and making sure that you are acknowledging all identities, you are bringing to light all identities, and you're also just making it making sure that like you explicitly say like there's no phobics in my classroom. I know it also really depends on like the class content. I think my anatomy professor does a really good job. Although she looks at me when she says it, which I feel is like I don't know, when she's like referring to like assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth, she's like, this is like sex is different than gender, blah blah blah. But she's always like I always catch her looking at me when she says this, and I'm just like, this doesn't make me feel very better, but I appreciate you saying that. Um but just making those little remarks, but it's little things, like it's really little things that all add up to a big safe space, yeah.
I'm just scrolling. I realized I didn't ask you, and you mean you talked about class, some economic class,
Yeah.
but I kind of skipped that area.
Yeah.
So, can you talk just a little bit about your class background and your current class status? And yeah,
Yeah. So in the Philippines, I would say we grew up middle class in Filipino standards, which is more lower class in American standards. So I remember sleeping like on a mat in the floor, all shared. We all just shared one room in my family because that was the room with the AC in it. I never really had to worry about going to bed hungry or anything, so in a way, I'm really privileged because of that. But we were definitely like we didn't have a lot of disposable income. And then my dad moved to the United States, and that changed completely to where we shot up to middle class in the United States. So for like the first time, I had my own room, and we were able to like. I remember for the longest time, I wanted like high high top black Converse, but we could never afford them in the Philippines. And then we moved to the United States, and that was like the first thing my dad bought me was like a pair of like the Converse, and so that was like a big moment for me. And to this day, I still own a pair of like high top black Converse. But yeah, so that was interesting because moving to the United States, we were middle class, and then after graduating from college, I went into the nonprofit sector, which is notorious for not paying not paying their employees well. So, and I was also living in the Bay Area, so that was a really interesting, like, kind of, I don't know, it was kind of because I found myself coming from like a middle class background, but I also like was living paycheck to paycheck. I had like a shoebox apartment, and sometimes I couldn't afford groceries, and I had to ask my parents to pay for my gas and stuff like that. So, I I've never gone to bed hungry, which I'm really fortunate for, and I know that like with poverty, especially childhood poverty, comes trauma. So I don't think that I have experienced that, but I definitely know what it feels like to live paycheck to paycheck and to really worry about money and not have any disposable income, which is kind of why I'm transitioning into nursing now because to me like how I see it is nursing is like the closest thing you can do to social work that still pays pretty lucratively. So I like was for a long time I was like experiencing really bad growing pains from like as I was talking to my therapist about just feeling unsatisfied and stuck and wanting more, but also wanting to continue the work that I was doing and like serving communities and working with other people. And so it was like a really hard jump to like finally like admit to my because I also was very like I don't know I was very anti-capitalist, very like when I was young like fresh grad I was I remember telling my mom like I don't care about money. Money is such like a three-dimensional thing that like I just like that's not how I want to live my life. But it took a lot of growing up to realize like yeah, money does play a very important factor into the quality of life that you have, or if you want to travel, if you want to have nice things. And I was watching all my friends who decided to go into the corporate world, the corporate sector. They have all the things that I wanted, and it was I don't know, it was just there was a lot of inner turmoil there of like wanting to continue social work, wanting to do do good, but I also knew like I'd never want to go into the corporate sector. I knew that I needed to have a job where I felt like my soul was happy and fulfilled, or else I would hate myself. So now I'm here, and it's hard, and I'm still kind of like torn up about it because I feel like I'm also selling myself out in a way. But at the same time, in social work, I've noticed that a lot of the people who fall into social work do come from lower class backgrounds. And I think a big part of it is because, and this sounds bad, but like you don't really know what you're missing out on if you never had it, versus where I had come from a middle class background, and I was like, I miss having nice stuff, and I'm used to having stuff, and I wanted it back. So I had to let go of that side of me that was very I had to let go of like the social work side of me to I don't know find peace within myself.
It's also nice to think that maybe you can retire at some point.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
you actually
yeah,
would have a retirement, and when
yeah,
you're lower
exactly.
middle class, as many social workers are, and it's more of a struggle.
No, yeah, and it's also just being an immigrant and like building roots. And my parents are gonna be at the age where they have to retire, and like we want, my mom told me like, hey, I don't know how we're gonna keep the house when your dad retires, because so I want to be able to help my family as well. And my mom fully supports her family in the Philippines. So when my mom retires, I want to be able to do that as well. So it's a lot of layers that came to this decision. But yeah,
So, do you think your queerness and your other identities, being immigrant, being Asian American, has that shaped what you, when you say you want to do good, right, in your career? Do you think that your identities matter in terms of your choice to do good?
I think so. Um, I think I don't know. You coming from the oppressed group, you understand what it's like to be oppressed, and which gives you like a deeper sense of empathy for others and a just stronger will for just like equality and equity, and wanting to fight for that, and wanting to kind of just do whatever you can so others can attain that. Even if like I was working primarily with unhoused youth, which I never faced myself, I know what it's like. I don't know. Like I can empathize, even if I can't relate, I can empathize. And so it just, yeah, it definitely makes you want to be more social justice driven. And for me personally, as a just like for me, I am very like passion driven. So I need to like really care about the work that I'm doing for me to be fully invested in it. And I think that also comes with having ADHD and the so yeah.
So, are you working for a wage right now?
Yes, partially part time. I got my CNA certification, so I was working as a CNA. But it was too hard to balance working full time on top of going to school. So I switched to part time, and I've interviewed for other classes because, and not other classes, other work, because when I switched to part time, they like significantly cut my hours, but I still need more money. So I'm trying to find a second job right now. But yeah, being a CNA was hard. Um, it also sucks because we are very much underpaid, especially being in the healthcare field. And I know how exhausted I feel at the end of the day, and I have a lot of older coworkers who are like in their 50s who are still like at it, and some of them are working like doubles or picking up extra shifts, and I'm like, I don't know how you're like providing for your family, you know, because I'm living for myself, and I don't feel like I'm making a lot of money, and they're paying for rent, they're paying for food, they're paying for childcare, all with the same paycheck that I'm taking home. So yeah,
Yeah, CNAs are really undervalued.
yeah, very much.
Where were you working as a
Um,
CNA, or where are you working?
this long-term care facility, Capital Post Acute, it's off of Florin.
So, are you? What's your experience being queer at work?
Uh,
Whether or not you're out.
oh yeah, no, I think my one of my first few days there, I was like working with another coworker who just like made it past a casual joke as like I said like, how do you not break your back like in this job, because we're like there's a lot of heavy patients, and he was like, oh, I'm a top, I don't like something like, and I was just like, oh, and then he was like, I'm sorry, and I was like, oh no, it's cool, like I'm queer too, and then he ended up, I like gave him shit for it, but I didn't really care. He ended up telling my other queer coworkers who like came, when one of them came, and I can tell like she's very masculine presenting, and she was always on the phone with her girlfriend. So I was like, okay, like I can. So she was like, hey, Mico, are you Team G? Like in like the break room. I was like, what's Team G? And he was like, oh. And then she like typed it out, and I was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So and then I asked her like, are there more of us here? And she was like, no, it's just the three of us. So we all kind of like gradually gravitated towards each other, but for the most part, it is a very cisgender hetero het environment. And yeah, being trans is interesting because I haven't had my name change. So in like my HR papers, and I like when I was going doing my onboarding, I like pulled my director of nursing aside and was like, hey, like as you can tell from my papers, like I'm trans. This is something that I don't want anyone to know. Anything like work facing, anything like patient facing, I would really want it to just say Mico, and I don't feel comfortable with other people knowing my gender identity here. And he was like, yeah. So they were very discreet about it, which I appreciated. But yeah, so that's, yeah. And I just kind of have to play a part sometimes.
Um, is that something you're thinking about doing? Changing your paperwork?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I want to. It just, well, for one, it's like $500 to change your name, plus like a trial date, and it's like a lot. It's just the bureaucratic process of it is a lot, so I haven't had the chance to, especially since I was pretty much living paycheck to paycheck, so I didn't have the disposable income in order to do so. But I'm working towards that. Um, I would like to. I think I have a medical application that's been processing for over a month, and I saw that like if you have medical, then you're eligible for a fee waiver. So I'm really kind of banking on that to be approved, and then so I can apply for the fee waiver and I can finally change my name. But with the changing your name comes all the like changing your passport, changing your license, and it's just a really tedious process that is hard to go through. So it's nice though. I That's one of the things I was afraid of, was like, which Los Rios does a really good job accommodating, is like you're able to change your name through like Canvas, and like anything student facing or professor facing will just say Mico. And I have like in the very like first day of class when the professors are taking rules, I remember kind of just having like this pit in my stomach of like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to explain to everyone, they're gonna say my dead name, but no, it just said Mico, which was like a relief.
Yeah, it's a development over the last few years.
Yeah, yeah.
So they still have your dead name somewhere in the records, but you haven't had any issue so far?
Just once during DS when I was trying to take my DSPS test, there I like tried to show up and take my test, and they were like, "Oh, you're not on this list." And then they like read my dead name, and I was like, "Oh, that's me." And they
Hmm.
like no questions asked. They just like gave me the test.
I've heard that before about DSPS and a couple of other. There have been a couple of other issues, but
Yeah,
it has a few students have said that about DSPS.
yeah.
Um, class. So being queer at work. Are you working with older disproportionately older patients as a
Uh,
CNA?
yeah,
Okay.
uh, kind of. Some of them are like more middle aged. Definitely, we have like very occasionally have younger patients, but they're kind of there for short term, so they can have they go through physical therapy and stuff. But long term patients tend to be older, or like in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Um, so do you have any concerns about your future economic class status?
Yes, all the time, especially with the student loan crisis. Um, it's hard because I also know having ADHD and being trans, I need medical insurance, and right now I'm like not having medical insurance. I'm having to like pay for testosterone out of pocket. I'm not really taking Adderall, so it makes school a lot harder, and I'm paying a lot of money so I can keep transitioning or maintain my hormones. So that's something I'm really worried about, and I'm very cognizant of. Is like I genuinely need to work, or else I'm kind of screwed. Yeah.
And how costly is it to pay for testosterone?
Um, my I just started this third party service, and the initial consult and the medicine and everything was probably around $340, which I split with my parents, which I'm also very fortunate for because I do have a financial safety net, which is my parents. But if I were like doing this all on my own, I would not be able to afford it.
How much do you think that's going to come out to monthly?
Now there's like a $40 maintenance fee, so it's a $40 membership fee, and then the meds were like $120 for 3 months, so it's probably around $70 a month if you break it down.
Um, so I guess last topic I wanted to ask about community. So how do you find community, or how have you found community in the past as well?
Yeah. Um, I think now, now at this point in my life, I don't really have an active community I'm part of, which is something I feel I'm very missing. Which is why I really hope I have the courage to go attend that event next week. And I really missed that. But during my undergrad, I had a really big community with as I joined the Filipino organization, and during high school, like doing theater and being like friends with people, I found my community as well, and I was very lucky and privileged to have been able to keep both, like largely maintain both of those groups, which also kind of makes me like, oh, I don't need to really find more people because I already have my people, but my people are now all very spread apart because we have moved forward in life. We have friends in LA and New York and the Bay Area, so I don't have like an immediate community in Sacramento anymore, which, sometimes is really lonely. And yeah, I think you just need, at first it's uncomfortable, but you really need to like put yourself out there and find people who are like minded and share the same like goals and values and morals as you. And yeah, eventually, I honestly believe you need a community, like you need people to get you by, and yeah.
Do you feel like queer spaces are, do you try to find community in queer spaces?
I want to, and I wish I used to be really, really extroverted, so I used to just be able to make friends a lot more easily. But as I've gotten older, I've become a lot more introverted, and so I tend to be a lot more reserved and shy for some reason. So it's harder for me to find people and put myself out there. But yeah, I think it's also hard because we don't really have a lot of spaces where it's like just casual, where you can like make friends, Like if you go to a drag show, you feel safe and there's a community there, but you're all focused on like the show. Or if you're at a club, you're all focused on like the atmosphere and the drinking and stuff. So it's not really like there's not really a space where you can just like sit down and talk and get to know people, and that takes like a very conscious effort in both parties that sometimes and honestly it's exhausting. The earlier parts of building your community is exhausting, and it takes effort to do, and I've put in that effort and I like build my communities, but now my communities are so far away. So I just feel like I don't really have the energy anymore to find and build a new community, although I really want one and I crave one. I feel like I would really benefit from one. Um, it's just exhausting.
So, what I know you said you're more introverted these days, but what concerns do you have about going into kind of random queer spaces with people you don't know?
I I've been told I'm like I'm very laid back to a fault, where I'm just very much like I don't really like I'm very like comfortable, and I don't know, like it's okay. I This is something I always say about myself is like I know I'm nice and I'm a good person, but I'm not very friendly, and that comes very largely from like my family background where my family's not friendly. So it's hard for me to like make friends initially, but it's very easy for me to like keep my friends and maintain my friendships. And so I'm not really like the most approachable person, and I tend to be very reserved in the beginning. So yeah, I don't know. And I just like I want to make friends, but I also like don't really.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it's nerve-wracking to go into those spaces.
Yeah, especially alone, you
Yeah, if you
know.
had a buddy to go with you, that would probably make it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I just like I only know like one other trans man in my like immediate life, and that was my old coworker who I haven't talked to in a really long time. I only know one other trans woman in my immediate life. So, although it's nice and I clung on to them a lot, it's also lonely, And so I can't really just like drag my friends around to spaces where there aren't really like made for them either, for my own comfort. So it's just hard to get out of your comfort zone.
Are you ever concerned that queer spaces are not going to be racially diverse enough?
That too. Yeah, yeah. A lot of queer spaces tend to be predominantly white, and the white queer experience is very, very different than like the queer space, like the person of color's queer experience. So yeah, that as well.
Is there a queer group, a Christian group at CRC?
I don't know.
I know there's a QSA at SCC, there's a GSA at ARC, but I'm actually not sure about CRC. I know there's a Pride Center.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Hmm.
I think it's also like, especially in the community college setting, a big factor is my age.
I
Like
was going to say, yeah.
I am 26. I've lived a lot of lives in comparison to a lot of my peers and classmates, and so there is that disconnect there of I don't know. I don't really have that inner drive to make friends with the people around me. It's more just like get in, get out, and do what I need to do to like be successful versus focusing on the social aspect of school.
Yeah, I can imagine that if you're a few years older than a lot of the students who are involved in the clubs, that age factor can
Yeah,
create social distance.
yeah,
So it could be nice to be around other queer folks or other queer folks of color, but if everybody's 18,
yeah. There's a very big generational disconnect there.
yeah. Okay, there's definitely more questions I should be asking, I know, but is there anything else that you would like to add, just in general? Any questions you'd like to return to? Anything you think should be added that I didn't ask about and you didn't get to
I
talk about yet?
No, I don't think so, but I'm happy to come back. I enjoy this. I think it was also very like therapeutic for me to like just flesh out these thoughts and experiences, and it's like I journal and stuff, but it's different actually like saying this out loud to someone. So
Well, I really appreciate you taking all of this time.
yeah,
Thank you.
of course.